Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Talk, Listen, and Discuss. It's been a while since I've seen you all, but I get back to you as soon as I can. I have been working a lot lately. I have a normal job like most of you out there do. And when I can, I find the time to make these videos. And in between making the videos and working, my spare time is spent a lot on researching. Wanted to send a huge thank you to my new friend, Christian, who sent me a lot of documents that he has on the Etan Patz case, and they have been a huge help. And I'm going to share a couple of them with you today. I'm also going to put a link to his blog in the description of this video, and I highly recommend that you go and visit his site. He has so much information on so many different cases, including the Etan Patz case. I will also cite the sources that I use that are not only Christians, but also where I'm gathering from other places, because I want you to be able to go and see where I'm getting my information and how you can use that information and also continue your own investigation into the case itself. Etan Patz. The Etan Patz case will be another case that will be visited in 2026 by the media, because in 2026 we will find out if the Supreme Court has allowed the conviction or has upheld the conviction of Pedro Hernandez, who has been convicted of the crime currently, and see if they didn't allow that conviction to be upheld, if the Manhattan DA will choose to retry Pedro Hernandez. Why would they retry him? Well, we're going to get to that. Maybe not in this video, but we definitely will get to it into the next video, because we are going to start looking at the suspects that came into the public landscape, but we're also going to look at some other suspects that were on the peripheral, but suddenly were not investigated any further, and also some accomplices that may be out there that I stumbled across that I have not seen really highlighted anywhere else, at least not in regards to the Etan Patz case. We got a lot to get into. Are you ready to do this? Me too. Let's go. Okay, on my last video, I left off with Julie Pates. She had just alerted the police and her husband to the fact that Etan had not come home after school and she didn't know where he was. Also, the house sitter had stopped by. Her name in the book after Etan is Sandy Harmon, but we now know her name to be Susan Harrington. And I want you to remember her name because while she doesn't seem important right now, she will be later. Susan Harrington stopped by the day that Etan Patz went missing, May 25, 1979, to pick up the keys because she believed she would be house sitting that weekend. But it would turn out, because, of course, Etan went missing, the family would stay put. They would have the police headquarters at their loft, and there would be no need for her to house sit anymore. The police arrived and they started trickling in. By the end of that night, there would be 100 policemen canvassing Soho to find Etan. They would do interviews with several of the business owners, the employees that worked around in those businesses, and the residents of that area. There are a lot of interviews that were documented, and there have been a lot of documents that describe the kind of search that was held, and it was a massive search. By the end of the week that Etan went missing, there would be up to 300 law enforcement professionals working on the case. Up until that point, or up until that year, Etan Patz would have set the record for the largest search for a missing person in the New York City area. Very, very sophisticated, highly involved search. Let me read you an article from the New York Times that went out at that time. And this is Searching for Missing Schoolboy, the New York Times. This is going to be the digitized version, so it may not be 100% true to the original version, but this is the one that is allowed free access by the New York Times. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the link to that so that you can read it as well. And I'm going to start it off here. A 6-year-old boy who disappeared after leaving his home in the Soho area of Manhattan was the object of a search yesterday afternoon by the police and neighborhood residents. The police also called in helicopters and bloodhounds for the search. The boy, Etan Patz, was described by the police as 40 inches tall, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and weighing 50 pounds. He was last seen by his parents, Stanley and Julie Patz, at 8 a.m. Friday when he left his home at 113 Prince Street. He normally boards a school bus 2 blocks west at the corner of West Broadway and Prince. But the bus driver and other children on the, I don't know what that's, oh, on the bus told the police that there's some of the characters are messed up, I think because they took the original and digitized it, and some of the characters are a little bit different. So I have to kind of guess what they're trying to say or what it's written on the bus told the police that the missing boy never got on the bus. However, late Friday afternoon, the boy was in a neighborhood lumber store, according to the store's manager. Now, remember, this is an article that came out very shortly after Pates went disappearing, very, very shortly after. We're doing a floor by floor, wall by wall, rooftop by rooftop, backyard by backyard search, said Deputy Inspector Denny Sayon, who was heading the investigation of 30 police officers and 5 detectives. He said there have been several reports and leads regarding the boy, but that each had proved fruitless. The parents telephoned Eton School, Public School 3 at 310 Greenwich Street, Friday afternoon when he did not return home. When officials said he had not attended school, the parents notified the police. Howard Belasco, manager of the Gem Lumber Company at 175 Spring Street, said the missing boy had been in his store at about 9:30 or 5 p.m. on Friday with another young boy. They were outside playing in a dumpster, pulling out scraps of lumber, and then they came here and bought 2 boxes of nails, Mr. Belasco said. Then they went around back and took some more scraps and they disappeared. Mr. Belasco said he had recognized the boy from a school picture distributed by the police, and here he is referring to Etan Patz. As a police helicopter flew overhead to search roofs, 2 bloodhounds brought in by state troopers picked up the boy's scent from his bedclothes and traced it to the lumber store. About 3 blocks west of the Pates home, the dogs entered the store several times but had trouble picking up the scent again on the street. Okay, so it had been drizzling that day. The police were already alarmed by the amount of rain and the drizzling that had occurred that day because the dogs did not come in until very late that night, almost early morning the next day. And they were already expecting that to be problematic for the dogs to catch any scent. And they even didn't tell the parents that at the time because they knew that they were already going through a lot and they didn't want to compound those feelings and those emotions. But I want you to remember one that we mentioned, Susan Harrington, also known as Sandy Harmon in the book After Eton. And I also want you to remember this story here, that the dogs caught a scent and it led them to the lumber store. Eton, a first grader, was wearing a blue jacket, blue pants, blue and white sneakers, and a black cap. Police officers were stationed in and around the Pates home, a large cooperative loft on the 3rd floor. Mr. Pates is a photographer, and he and his wife have a daughter about 4 years old. Actually, I believe the daughter was a lot older than 4, so there are already some inaccuracies in here. One well, potentially inaccurate, that Mr. Belasco saw Etan the way late into the afternoon on a Friday, potentially inaccurate. 2, that Etan was wearing blue jacket, blue pants, and blue and white sneakers and a black cap. Aton was wearing a very distinctive cap, and it was a pilot's cap. And while I'm not saying what he described as wrong, that is a very significant, a very distinguishing hat that he was wearing that would have helped a lot of people with immediate recognition had it been mentioned. Now, I'm not saying that that is what caused people not to remember because of this. I'm just saying that if you're going to describe somebody who's missing, it's very important to get the outfit right, especially if part of the outfit is something that's very distinguishable. Police officers were stationed in and around the Pates home, a large cooperative loft on the third floor. Mr. Pates is a photographer, and he and his wife have a daughter about 4 years old. Actually, I believe she was about 7 years old. The police, or no, she was about 8. She was definitely older than Aton, so about a couple of years older. The police asked that anyone with information about Aton call the home at this number. Again, there was 3 kids. The oldest daughter, who was Aton's sister, who was about, I'm gonna guess, I think she was about 8, maybe 9, somewhere around there. And then he had a younger brother, Ari, who was about, I want to say he was a toddler. He was like at least 2, maybe at the time, something like that. Well, the most important part of that is he had an older sister and he had a younger brother, and then there was Aton right smack in the middle. Later, 2 men and women who described themselves as artists who lived in the area and who have children walked up to a police officer in front of the home and volunteered to help in the search. We will just walk around and try to think like a 6-year-old, one of the men said. Aton Pates was 6 years old when he went missing, and I do think that that's a brilliant strategy to think like a 6-year-old. What would a 6-year-old do? How could a 6-year-old get lost, or how could a 6-year-old be put in a position of harm? And I think that that was an excellent strategy, and it is one that I used myself when I was going through this case and wondering what happened to Aton Pates. Who could have taken Aton Pates? Why would they have taken Aton Pates? And why are we still here after all this time? There were so many questions that came up in this investigation, and I think to really get into a resolution or getting close to a resolution, you had to think like a 6-year-old, but I think that that's where law enforcement messed up. They started thinking like a perp. And while that's not necessarily the worst thing to do or an irresponsible thing to do, it actually takes us further from Soho instead of keeping us closer into Soho. And that's what I wanted to establish here. That just right off the jump, we can see a lot of inaccuracies in the reporting, as well as get kind of the frenzied environment, of course, that you would expect when a child goes missing and law enforcement becomes involved. The Pates would establish headquarters at their loft. Several policemen were always there. There were policemen on the streets searching, canvassing, going back over everything, even getting blueprints for the buildings in the area. And while at the house, the Pateses and law enforcement there were screening thousands of phone calls. That would be going on for at least 2 to 3 months. There was very little that law enforcement was not doing to bring this child home, or at least to get to the truth of what happened to Aton Pates. In fact, during the canvassing, there would be 2 reports that really resonated with me and why I find them compelling, because law enforcement, or at least the majority of law enforcement at this time, believed that Aton never made it to the bus stop. I myself believe he never made it to the bus stop. So the 2 reports that I want to read to you are from investigators, and they took these reports either the day that Aton went missing, or they followed up with certain of the preliminary reports to get a more thorough reply. So one of them is going to be from the postman at the time, and I'm going to be reading the follow-up report to him, but his story stays the same. They are just able to get more information about him himself. And then the second one will be the original one from the from a resident in the area. And this resident, all his reports are pretty much similar, very short and to the point. So that's why I'm going to be sharing his original, but I'm going to be following up with the postman's follow-up report because they give a little bit more in that one. So let's start off with the postman. Now, both reports are really good information on, or at least they're really good to substantiate the claim that Etan never made it to the bus stop. So this report was taken on 5/26/79, but the date that the report was actually completed was 5/28/79. So on Saturday morning, 5/26/79 at approximately 0030 hours, the assigned called Mr. Monroe Bernberg via telephone number, and it gives a telephone number. He stated that he lives in a loft apartment on the top floor at 121 Prince Street, New York City, works at 59 John Street, New York City, with a telephone number of this. He further stated that on the morning of 5/25/79, which was a Friday, he left his building between 7:50 and 7:55 hours and saw Etan walking west toward West Broadway. So that is part of the follow-up statement, or the original statement, for Mr. Monroe Bernberg, also known as Monty, who was a resident in that area, who saw Etan Patz. Okay, so the other one is going to be the follow-up, and this is from the mailman. And this report was completed on 6/22/79, and it was actually given on 6/22/79. On Friday, 6/22/79 at 08:20 hours, I re-interviewed the mailman, Jersey Whitaker, at 1854 Dean Street, basement, and then it gives the telephone number, who on weekends resides with his sister Anita Tillman at, and it gives an address that's been redacted, Roosevelt, Illinois, or no, Roosevelt, New York, no phone. Mr. Whitaker, a black male, 5'6", 135 pounds, with black hair, brown eyes, and his date of birth was 5/10/48, is employed by the U.S. Post Office on Canal Street Station, and they also give the telephone number. And he is known to this department as, it gives his employee or his some kind of identifier here, and has a record of one arrest. And the arrest was at the age of 81, or sorry, the arrest was with the 81st precinct on 5/13/74 for felonious assault and possession of a dangerous instrument, which was a pot. It says a pot on the complaint of, and it's redacted. This case docketed under number 8416523, and I'm trying to get a copy of that, was dismissed in Kings County Criminal Court by Judge Saglia on 7/5/74. Mr. Whitaker stated that on 5/25/79 at approximately 0800 hours, he was distributing his route on Wooster Street. He stated that he proceeded north on Wooster Street and observed the subject of this investigation standing off the curb in the gutter on the east side of Wooster Street at the northeast crosswalk of Wooster and Prince Streets. He said that the boy was looking south on Wooster Street as he passed the boy while proceeding north on Wooster Street. When questioned as to the presence of anyone else whom he may have noticed on the street at the time, he recalled a male white who was walking two plain-looking dogs, apparently mutts. However, he stated that this male was proceeding west on Prince Street, away from where the boy was situated, and that this male was approximately a half block away from the boy. He did not see the male's face. After passing the boy, Mr. Whitaker stated that he made his last delivery approximately 50 feet north of where he had seen the boy, and then proceeded across Wooster Street to the west side and through a parking lot to West Broadway, where he proceeded south to West Broadway and Prince, and West Broadway and Prince would be where the bus stop was, where he picked up more mail at a storage box. He then proceeds by the same route back to Wooster Street and continued his route. He did not see the boy again. Mr. Whitaker did recall seeing a mother and a son or daughter, I think that's what it says, through the parking lot as he was returning to his route. Investigation continuing and the case is active. Okay, so we have two eyewitnesses that see Etan within Prince and Wooster the intersection. So I'm going to show that to you on this map. You're going to see on this is actually coming from oddstop.com, where somebody with a blog is going to all these odd stops, and one of them he visits is the bodega. And the bodega is where Pedro Hernandez, who is now the accused and has been found guilty in a court of law of abducting and murdering Etan Patz, even though a body was never found. He confessed to this, and we'll be going through this story more thoroughly later. But he worked in this bodega, so the guy actually went and visited that bodega. But that bodega has now been turned into, I think, a very up-end socks, SOCKS, store. And so here you can see where the apartment encircled, that's where Etan Patz lived in that loft there. Now, if you see that first intersection as you move to the left, even though it's not written here, it is Wooster Street. So that would be Prince and Wooster is the first intersection. And then when you start moving upward, that second intersection that is closest to the bodega is is West Broadway and Prince Street. And where the two eyewitnesses saw Etan would be right before that Prince Street and Wooster. And as far as I can tell through the reports that I have seen, all of them have reported, though nobody has reported seeing Etan at the bus stop, nor have we seen him be reported as sighted anywhere past the Wooster and Prince intersection. This is why I believe he did not make it to the bus stop, and this is why I believe a majority of law enforcement believes he did not make it to that bus stop. The only time we ever see where Etan was at the bus stop is through Pedro Hernandez's account, and we will get to that story later. And again, remember the story I was reading to you where the lumber yard, the Gem Lumber Company at 175 Springs Street said the missing boy had been at his store at 9:30 or 5 p.m. on Friday. That would have been later that afternoon, well after the 3 o'clock, the 3:10 to 3:30 when Etan was reported missing to the police officers. That is when, if Etan had been at the lumber company, it would have been well after the policemen had started canvassing and alerting the community of a missing child. So we believe that Howard Velasco, the manager of the Gem Lumber Company, either had the days wrong, and it was actually maybe a Thursday when he saw Etan on this boy, or quite possibly, more likely, he it was not it was a different boy that he saw at the lumber store. And I kind of just wanted to bring that out there to you because that is something that is mentioned not only here in this article, but it also will be referenced in some of the court reports you may see where this gentleman does say he saw him that night. And while I don't want to dismiss it, I also want to point out that had he seen him, then this would have been during one of the more active times during the search where policemen were building up to about 100 in presence uh, during the canvassing, the searching the area, because by the end of the night, there would be 100 policemen patrolling or headquartering with the Pateses. Okay, so there's that. Another possibility that is within the area that we will also be talking about is a handyman that worked within that vicinity, within the Wooster and the Prince Street vicinity. The handyman that I'm about to talk to you now lived closely in a basement to Etan Pates, and it would have been within the Wooster and Prince intersection. Let me read this story coming from abcnews.go.com, and it's the handyman in Etan Patz probe says he's innocent. When Pedro Hernandez was discovered, it was discovered this way. A witness had called the police and told them that they had been reluctant to share this piece of information, but now they were sharing it. The witness said she saw Etan Patz with the black handyman and that they went into the basement and she never saw Etan again after that. That is what precipitated the police force to go and dig up the handyman's floor in 2012 to see if Etan Patz's remains were there because dogs had alerted that there had been decomposition there at one point in time. Now, according to some reports, that would have happened if a dead body had been there for at least 20 minutes. The dogs would have been able to grab the scent of decomposition years later. I don't know how accurate that is. I find it very difficult to believe, not impossible, just difficult. But that was enough based on the what the witness said so many years later, decades later, and what the dog's activities were, their actions were with the alerting. They went in there and they tore up the handyman's floor, who had decades before given them permission to tear up the floor, but if and only if they would pay for the floor to be restored. And at the time, the police department was like, "No, we're not going to do that. That's too expensive." But thanks, but no thanks. Okay, we're moving on. Decades later, that's exactly what they would do. They would tear up the floor. And the reason why they were going to tear up the floor decades before is because somebody had said, well, the handyman just tore up his floor and laid down a new floor. And it seemed to happen within days of Etan going missing. And that's why they were suspect on that. The handyman was actually good buddies with Etan, according to his mother, even when she testified. That is how she said they were buddies. Etan would be excited to go and visit with him when he could. And the night before Etan went missing, this handyman gave Etan $1 for helping him with some chore that I think that he might have made up, just, that kind of like, hey, will you help me with this? Oh, here's $1. He was just, it seemed like it was that kind of personable, amiable neighborhood, friendly neighborhood handyman. Okay, so that's what it seemed like it was. And so I'm going to read why in 2012, I already briefly told you why they were excavating the floor. And I'm going to read you an article that came out about that time from ABC News. April 20th, 2012. A lawyer for the handyman Othniel Miller, whose basement workshop is the focal point of a new investigation into the Etan Patz case today, denied he had anything to do with the little boy's disappearance more than 3 decades ago. This report was written April 20th, 2012. It's been over 40 years now. Mr. Miller did not do this, Michael Farkas, the attorney for Miller, told reporters outside the Brooklyn building where Miller lives. Mr. Miller denies involvement with what happened to this beautiful young boy, and he's going to remain cooperative to the extent that's reasonably possible given this investigation, Farkas said. Now, let me tell you, I really believe that this lawyer is pretty smart. Why do I say this? Because one of the reasons that policemen were also suspicious of Othniel Miller, and I hope I'm saying his name right. It's Othnil, is that he said that he had nothing to do with Etan's disappearance, that Etan was a beautiful boy and he loved to give him hugs or something like that. And the policemen were like, that's kind of weird. Now, this in 2012, the lawyer is basically saying those same words. And I think it's to show that, hey, that's a word, a descriptive that anybody could say because this boy was innocent and yeah, beautiful. And I think that he did that to kind of take away the awkwardness from the years before when the handyman delivered basically that same descriptive, that same adjective in regards to Etan Patz, who's 6 years old. Pates, who was 6, disappeared on the morning of May 25th, 1979, soon after leaving his parents' apartment at 113 Prince Street. The handyman's basement would be at 121 Prince Street, and the neighbor that I mentioned earlier was living in a loft on 121 Prince Street. Pates, who was 6, disappeared on the morning of May 25th, 1979, soon after leaving his parents' apartment at 113 Prince Street, the first time he was to walk to the school bus stop by himself. Authorities today began the first full day of digging in the Manhattan basement at 127 Prince Street for new evidence. Yeah, 127 is where he lived, and 121 was where the resident lived. For new evidence following the startling discovery that the missing child may never have made it off his own New York City block. I still believe that's true. I still believe that's true. I believe he did not make it past Wooster and Prince Street when he was abducted, when he disappeared, when he went missing. Pate's 1979 disappearance sparked a massive citywide search 33 years ago, of course, now over 40 years ago. But now the FBI and New York City police believe they may find evidence in what was then a handyman's basement workshop just steps away from where the boy was last seen. The small basement room at the center of the investigation belonged to Miller, now 75, and was also frequented by the case's longtime prime suspect, Jose Ramos. The small basement room at the center of the investigation belonged to Miller, now 75, and was also frequented by the case's longtime prime suspect, Jose Ramos, or Jose Ramos. That is a very important detail. I want you to hold on to that. I want you to hold on to the name Susan Harrington. I want you to hold on to some of the early descriptives, narratives that we are given, including the 2 eyewitness accounts that I gave you about seeing Etan on the intersection of Wooster and Prince, one from the mailman, and one, although not said Wooster and Prince, was well within. And if you see the map of that intersection by the resident who lived in that area. And now I want you to hold on to the fact that the handyman who lived or worked in the basement, I'm not clear on whether he lived there, but we know for sure that was a basement that he worked in, was frequented by the case's longtime prime suspect, Jose Ramos, who I will talk about him in our next video and how they came to find him and discover that he was a likely suspect in the Etan Patz missing case. Between 30 and 40 cops and FBI special agents, let me back up. Federal agents and New York City police began Thursday to tear up the concrete floor of the basement, and the excavation was in full swing Tuesday, and by mid-afternoon, the basement was all in pieces, said FBI Special Agent Tim Flannelly. Between 30 and 40 cops and FBI special agents hauled the parts of the basement up and into bins. Later, the material will be sifted and sorted. NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly described the methodical way investigators were digging into the basement using workers from New York City's Con Ed Power Company to assist with jackhammering. The room, he said, was divided into 4 sections, with concrete being removed from one section before digging commences in the next section. That's a very involved activity. It took them 5 days to do this. He said it was a very controlled and precise digging operation, actually started with the back wall. Prosecutors reopened the cold case 2 years ago and began focusing on the Prince Street basement room following an interview with Miller. Prosecutors reopened the cold case 2 years ago and began focusing on the Prince Street basement room following an interview with Miller. We're going to talk more about how I think that came to be. That interview prompted the FBI and NYPD to put special odor-absorbing pads in the room for 4 days. When those pads were presented to cadaver dogs, they signaled the odor of human remains. The dogs were then brought to the basement where they again indicated the scent of human remains. So the dogs alerted to human remains scent based on the samples they were given from the concrete floors. And one of the reasons why this also came to be was because in one of his interviews, when the FBI told him what they were going to do, the handyman, Mr. Miller, asked them well, what if the body had been moved? Would it still alert the dogs? Would the scent still be there lingering? And that's when the explanation of if the body had been there for 20 minutes, yes. They found that question very bizarre, and that's why I mentioned it here. Investigators then interviewed Miller again before obtaining a warrant and beginning to dig. Kelly said an array of new technology unavailable to law enforcement in 1979, including x-rays and black lights, are being used in the investigation. Since DNA and a lot of the new technology that has come out, for example, the x-rays and black lights, so many cold cases have been solved because of the advancements in technology. This is a good thing. The new investigation in also re-examining the decades-old assumption that Pates was abducted by a convicted pedophile, Jose Ramos. Ramos, now in prison for an unrelated case, was never charged with Pates's abduction, and we are going to talk about that too. We have so many things to talk about. Why did they reopen the case in, in 2012? Why did it all of a sudden, was it a case that had to be reopened? And before then, why did it take until about 2003 for them to even have Jose Ramos on their radar? The preparations for the search included mapping the basement, making sketches, taking photographs, and other procedures for collecting evidence. According to sources, the area of the basement where the dog picked up the scent appears to be one that had been resurfaced with fresh concrete at or shortly after the time of Pates's disappearance. Interesting. Very interesting. There's so much here that once you take some of the documentation you find from the media, the sources, the interviews, and align them with the court reporting documentation, as well as other things out there, other material that could be out there and other media sources, once you get as much as you can and you start sorting through them, there is so much there, and we're going to get through it. I'm going to bring you to the suspects. I'm going to bring you to why the case was opened, to why the suspects were considered, to why they were dismissed. I'm going to throw in there why some things were considered while other things were tossed out. It's it's so much. And yet, by the time I'm done with my video, not only will I brought up a new person of interest, but I would also have brought up to you why I think this went the way it went, who I think, who, like many who I think were involved, and it may even sound a little bit conspiratorial. It's going to be fascinating, but I hope it will be compelling, and I hope it is something that you will help me deliberate, discuss, and we can come to a consensus on how probable you think it is. Because justice can be served anytime, especially if people like us continue to dig and to fill in the gaps that were either intentionally or unintentionally left. I also want you to keep one last thing in mind. In 2003, the FBI created a program that is called the Innocence Lost Program. And this Innocence Lost Program would have an operation tied to it. And the operation is called Operation Cross Country. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and God bless you. See you later. Bye.